first quarantine. Buy new age solution.
What's happening right now in the world reminds me of the first time I was in quarantine. I used to work for an international aid organization. My team specialized in supporting areas affected by severe infectious outbreaks. My first assignment was in the winter of 1994, when we were sent to a secluded town in eastern Russia with a population of roughly 2,000 people. For confidentiality reasons, I won't disclose my organization's name or the town this incident occurred in. The community was suffering from an outbreak being referred to as Putzir Bolitsin, bubble sickness. Its name was derived from the pink and darker gray blister-like lesions that closely resembled bubbles in shape, which broke out across the victim's skin. The sickness also had the classic flu-like symptoms: high fever, cough, body aches, and in severe cases, delirium. We arrived in town 10 days after the first case was reported. Since then, 57 people contracted the illness, out of which 14 had perished. Our primary responsibilities were to distribute supplies, set up a temporary infirmity, morgue, and implement quarantine protocols. We weren't worried about the illness spreading beyond the town given how secluded it was, and knew the Russian government would keep the situation quiet. 5 days after my team arrived, the number of cases and fatalities respectively rose to 98 and 29. The town took a more aggressive approach and put a mandatory quarantine in place, prohibiting residents from leaving their homes under any circumstances. Only soldiers, the town's small police force, and my team were permitted outside for door-to-door supply deliveries, working at the morgue infirmary, along with testing the townspeople to monitor the fever's spread. I became particularly friendly with one woman named Leah, whose home was on my delivery route. She lived on a small farm in the outskirts of the town and had an infant son named Alexei. Her husband was working on an oil field in Siberia at the time and wouldn't return until the spring. Although her home was out of the way, I always made it a priority to get anything to her she and her baby needed, both of whom eluded the sickness. I even gave her a portable radio to contact me directly in case of emergency. Leah, who spoke very good English, was endlessly thankful for my help and started giving me little gifts like trinkets and knickknacks she made herself as a token of her gratitude. 1 month after we arrived, the sickness only worsened. The number of cases rose to 300, out of which 74 died. My team felt the control of the situation slipping when some of our fellow colleagues became sick, with one dying just days after first showing symptoms. The Russian government took matters into their own hands that time by instating some bold measures. Everyone was to remain in place for 28 days. Anyone caught roaming the streets would be arrested or shot. My team was allowed to continue our routine duties though, but were prohibited from venturing outside of the perimeter set up around the town. I was very concerned for Leah at this time, whose house was located just outside the perimeter. The lockdown was instated right before I was supposed to drop off Leah's next round of supplies. Although I pleaded to make one last drop, government officials making the calls didn't budge. Each supply delivery gave a household about 2 weeks' worth of food, water, medicine, and other materials. I feared Leah and her son had left and would only last a few days. Although I was powerless to physically get her any supplies, I vowed to maintain radio contact with Leah and kept a log of our conversations. Since it was a portable radio and Leah was low on batteries, we only spoke for a few minutes each day. She had to keep the radio off when she wasn't using it to conserve power. Below is my log detailing some of our interactions over this 28-day period. Day 4. Leah thinks that she has roughly 5 to 7 days of supplies left for her and Alexei. If she rations everything properly, Leah believes she could last up to 10 days.
"I'm concerned about my baby,"
she said, the fear very apparent in her voice as it cracked through the radio.
"There has to be something you can do for my baby."
Despite her looming shortage of necessities, Leah has said she nor Alexei were exhibiting any Pudzer-Bolitsin symptoms. She was keeping herself busy by crafting more trinkets and knickknacks. Day 9. Leah thinks she underestimated how much food she has left for she and Alexei. She's down to 2 jars of baby food, 1 packet of formula, and has run clean out of diapers. She cried for the first time today. The fear and uncertainty in her voice were so disconcerting and surreal, it prompted me to take action. I quickly forged a plan to get Leah and her son the supplies they sorely needed. Before I was set to embark, however, a vicious blizzard rolled in that blanketed the region with over 3 feet of snow. The quarantine prevented any roads from being cleared, making Leah's home physically inaccessible. I still get haunted by the sounds of her hopeless weeping when I told her the news. There was one particular remark she said that sticks with me today.
"Perhaps my son and I weren't meant to overcome this dark time. If the sickness does not kill us, we may be condemned to death of a much greater suffering."
Day 11. Another 2 feet of snow fell last night. The town is practically buried. I don't even think people can get out of their homes if they tried. The snow has made our job a lot more difficult, since the roads aren't being shoveled and can't be. To me, the snow personifies my mounting dismay and despair of helping Leah and her baby. The feeling of powerlessness is absolutely smothering. I broke down when I last spoke to Leah. She's so scared. Although she understands why I cannot reach her, part of me cannot help but blame myself for her current predicament. Day 14. Leah has run out of supplies for herself. The fact that she was able to make what little she had last this long was remarkable, and certainly a testament to her perseverance. She said Alexei only had a few spoonfuls of baby food left. She has no formula or diapers. The baby was constantly crying when I spoke to Leah. Every whimper sent chills down my spine and formed a knot in my stomach. I'm unsure of how effective this quarantine is, since the number of cases has now risen to 900, nearly half of the town. Fatalities are nearly a quarter at 350. This disease spares no one, and I'm at least thankful it hasn't reached Leah and Alexei. Perhaps living along the outskirts of the town was a blessing for them in that regard, but like Leah said, it could also be a precursor to a more antagonizing demise. Day 15. Leah fed Alexei the last of his food. They're now both completely out of supplies. She spent our conversation weeping and blaming herself for putting her son through this, and kept asking why she wasn't more prepared. I tried comforting her, but Leah was inconsolable. I haven't slept the last 2 nights. I can't get Leah and her baby off my mind. The trepidation, guilt, and sorrow has weighed heavily on me, especially since our radio interactions don't feel nearly as reassuring. I haven't eaten much today. It doesn't feel right knowing people like Leah and her baby don't have access to the same means. Part of me hopes I do contract Pudzer-Bolitsin, so I don't have to listen to their suffering. Day 18. Leah said it's been 5 days since she had anything to eat, 3 days for the baby.
"All I want is to end my baby's suffering,"
Leah sobbed to me when we spoke today.
"I don't care if I make it out of this alive. I just want Alexei's suffering to stop. Why must someone so new on this earth have to deal with life's most unforgiving hand?"
All I can do is tell Leah to take things one day at a time and assure her everything will be fine. I know Leah can sense the false hope in my voice. The baby's cries sound like hollers of sheer agony that grow worse every day, like the poor child is being physically tortured. A little piece of me dies every day after Leah and I speak. Part of me wonders if this subjection to Leah and her baby's continual suffering is punishment for some misdeed I've previously committed. I don't know what I could have said or done to deserve such a demoralizing penance. Day 19. I think Leah is taking a turn for the worst. She aimlessly babbled on about how hungry she was, or making new trinkets and knickknacks, and anticipating the return of her husband from Siberia.
All the baby does is cry,
Leah said when I asked about the baby.
I left him in his crib upstairs so I can have some solace from his infernal shrieks and cries. I can't do anything to ease my child's pain. I have accepted that reality, although he grows weaker by the day, but his cries are becoming more piercing and unbearable. I'm just so hungry too. So hungry.
Leah's voice was very hoarse and weak. She claims they aren't sick, but would welcome the illness at this point, which she described as liberating. There are now 1,000 cases of the virus. Hundreds have died, including members of my team as well. The infirmary and morgue are both at capacity. Any new cases have been ordered to self-quarantine in their homes. Bodies are starting to pile up in the snow next to the morgue. How I haven't caught this illness is either a miracle or a catalyst prolonging my torment of the inevitable. Day 24. I haven't heard from Leah in days. Today, she finally responded.
Alexei is dead. My baby boy is gone.
That was all she said. Day 26. I managed to get in touch with Leah, but she was completely despondent. She just sobbed and rambled incoherently, constantly shifting between English and Russian. From what I could decipher, Leah kept lamenting about her baby dying and proclaiming herself a failure as a mother and wife. Earlier in this quarantine, I would have been beyond distraught over Leah's loss, but felt totally numb now, almost emotionless when we spoke. All I did was give Leah the same empty assurance that everything would be fine in a flat, robotic tone. I reminded her that the quarantine was ending in 2 days, after which I would immediately come over to her house with supplies. She didn't seem to care or listen, probably because she knew I didn't even believe my own words. This illness didn't have to infect everyone to inflict pain. What I experienced here will plague my memories for years. Although I'm surviving, I've been long dead on the inside. It's amazing Leah had managed to go this long without food. I sincerely hope she doesn't succumb to the heaviness of losing her child and give up, especially with 2 more days left. She has to remain strong to keep her child's memory alive. Day 28. The quarantine has finally been lifted, but it's still going to take some time before I can reach Leah's farm. The number of new cases is slowing, but the death toll exceeded 700. More than 75% of the town fell ill. It's hard to say if the quarantine truly worked, but we're confident the town will eventually recover. We worked frantically to dig out the town streets and start getting supplies to households. I tried radioing Leah, letting her know the quarantine was over and I would be at her house as soon as possible. She never responded. It took another 2 days before I finally got to Leah's farm. I and 2 of my colleagues rushed over to her house with a full replenishment of supplies. The front door was unlocked, and when we first stepped inside, we were hit by a wall of putrid stink, containing the distinct odors of feces and decay. Bundles of fecal-infested diapers, rags, and cloths were piled in a few room corners. Some sections of walls were covered in deep scratch marks and holes, along with smears of feces and what appeared to be blood. The house was in varying degrees of disarray, looking like Leah threw a massive tantrum and destroyed parts of her home in the process. We found Leah curled up in a corner of her living room. She was mired in filth, looking like she hadn't bathed or slept in days. She surprisingly wasn't as frail as I anticipated from malnourishment, but was completely checked out mentally. Leah seemed to recognize me, and she signaled she wanted to give me something she was tightly clenching. When I extended my hand, she dropped a small white trinket in the shape of an A that was about the size of a quarter. "I made them to keep my son's memory alive," Leah weakly said, who was in a deep trance when she spoke to me. "Promise me you'll keep it, and always have a piece of my baby boy that stays with you." The A was intricately carved and felt smooth to the touch. I was actually impressed by the flawless shade of white, which almost looked professionally done. It looked to have been carved out of marble or ivory. The hardest part came next, when I asked Leah where her baby's body was located. She started fiercely sobbing and trembling before shakily pointing toward the kitchen. A knot formed in my stomach when I started easing toward that part of the house, while my colleagues tended to Leah. Amid the nauseating stenches filling that house, I quickly distinguished the aroma of rot and decay that was excessively associated with death. The kitchen was as bad as the rest of the house, with empty cans, broken dishes, and glasses, along with soiled clothes and other undefinable stains and smudges strewn around the floor, table, and counter. Burying my nose in a cloth to withstand the stomach-churning smell, I walked up to the table, where half a dozen other A's lay clustered next to some rags, tools, along with a small stack of white porcelain shards that I presumed Leah used to craft the trinkets. A sharp sinking feeling befell me when I noticed a dish at the head of the table that was covered in blackish red smears. The utensils were also covered with the same substance that I willfully remained ignorant on identifying. I noticed a cluster of flies congregated over the sink. I shuddered upon seeing what was inside. 4 limbs, no less than 5 or 6 inches, that were completely stripped of their flesh, except for the tiny hands and feet at the end of each limb, which were unmistakably an infant's. "Please, no," I murmured while fighting the urge to vomit and acknowledging my worst suspicions were confirmed. I violently turned away from the sink, starting to keel over slightly in anticipation of vomiting. It was then my eyes were drawn to the oven, where another cluster of flies were buzzing around, and the stench of death was strongest. My limbs trembling, I slowly stood upright and crept toward the oven. Although I refrained from inhaling, I still felt the warm, grimy wall of the decaying odor rush out as I opened the door, inside of which lay Alexi's head and limbless torso. The body was burnt to a crisp and was that same blackish red color as the smears on the dinner plate. While initially feeling sorrow and remorse, those sentiments were replaced with repulsion and sheer terror when I noticed chunks of flesh had been removed from the body with surgical precision, and parts of the baby's fleshless torso were stripped bare to the bones. The appalling sight, one I can still clearly visualize after all of these years, made me face the morbid truth I was desperately trying to deny, but explained why Leah managed to survive this long without food. She ate her baby. My breathing was reduced to short gasp-like breaths as a wave of panic swept over me, during which I turned away from the sanguinary sight and looked back at the table, where I noticed another unsettling detail before storming out of the house. A closer look of the stack of porcelain shards that Leah used to shape her trinkets affirmed that they were something else. Pieces of skull, ribs, and spine. I retrieved the A-shaped trinket Leah had given me, staring at it in sheer terror and disgust before chucking it across the kitchen. The trinkets were composed of bone. She had been using her dead infant child's bones to craft these ornaments. Leah's words, "You'll always have a piece of my baby boy that stays with you," and what she literally meant rang through my head as I bolted outside and started vomiting profusely. I refused to re-enter the house and never saw Leah again after that fateful day. I don't know what became of her, but heard whispers she descended to a point of uncontrollable insanity and was subsequently placed in an institution. I refused to ponder whether Leah waited until her baby died or if she put him out of his misery. At the end, 1,600 people fell ill to Putzerbollitzen. The final death toll was 808. I don't remember how much longer I spent in that town, but was eternally grateful when we finally left. Although I've been told there was nothing I could have done to save Leah and her son, I still suffer from insurmountable guilt and am ruthlessly haunted by these memories. Things may look bleak now, but I can assure you that very few, if any at all, have endured the experiences I faced during my first quarantine, and hope that none of you ever do. Out of Quarantine by Drunken Tree. After 23 days, I can hardly recognize fresh air. Since February, the nearest I've come was Dr. Arnold's cologne, faintly contaminating the forms he brought me to sign. Being almost outside leaves me breathless. Though my dreams are never this tangible and detailed, I cannot shake the fear I'm still asleep, that Dr. Arnold never came this morning to unlock my door, that I'll wake in my compartment, Dr. Arnold in his biohazard bunny suit securely outside the glass door. When I went in, we were still in deep winter. While I've been locked away, undeniable signs of spring have broken out. I detect flowers, grass, and dew-moist moss. Somewhere nearby, Bradford pears are in bloom. Their sour stench is unmistakable. I've been locked away while all the world woke up. All my life, 44 years, I've hated winter, lived for the days when the world turned green again. But this year, I spent the first days of spring behind glass. I've completely missed the crocuses. My wife Nita sent photos of them blooming in our front yard. I'm sure she meant to cheer me up, but they only highlighted my hopeless situation. A small cloud drifts away from the sun, and I feel its full strength for the first time since February. The sunlight makes my head swim. The facility's LED lamps were bright but small, unbearable to look at but spreading only a modest light. They were specialty high-intensity ultraviolet LEDs as well, casting sterilizing light over the room each day during my disinfecting shower, then searing germs from the shower as I ate nutritious, tasteless breakfast. The sun warms my shoulders as the breeze blows cool around me. Just 2 nights ago, during a video chat with my wife, my diagnosis was still unclear and no release in sight. Nita told me she'd rather die than be locked up in quarantine away from sunlight. I told her that was silly, but after she hung up, I cried for an hour. It was worse than she could possibly imagine. Thousands of little star-shaped wildflowers dot the lawn now. I've seen these all my life, but never known their names. There are several kinds, some with 4 petals, some with 5, all tiny. I bend down. The nearest has 5 pointed petals, brilliant white, with bright violet veins. Singly, it's too small to smell, but in their thousands they gently coat my sinuses with freshness. Nearby is a clump of what I assume are dandelions, not yet fallen to the gardener's diligence. Their yellow is dazzlingly bright in the sunshine, the purest color I've seen in weeks. All the yellows inside were dull and brownish, only pale and weak, the color of dried mustard, or worse, oozing pus. I have to squeeze back tears at the fear of being shut away from dandelions. The grass, half wakened from its winter dormancy, is hardly less vivid, a green to wash the memory of pain from my eyes. It smells impossibly alive, unlike the odors of disinfectant, of fake citrus air freshener, of cotton sheets crisp from the laundry, heated nearly to scorching to kill any germs. For the last 2 weeks, I had to make my own bed. Nobody allowed in my compartment. If there had been anything to tie them to, I might have used the clean sheets to make a noose. Instead, I lay flaccid upon them, defeated. Dr. Arnold kept telling me not to give up, though. Beds of butter and cream jonquils line the sidewalk. A few early tulips have sent up leaves and bud stems, but none yet opened. Why couldn't they have made this facility's interior as cheery as the landscaping? Rounding the corner, I see Bradford pears flanking the parking lot, their crowns explosions of white, corpse-like blossoms. At the end of the sidewalk, forsythia stalks wave higher than my head, yellow blossoms even more radiant than the dandelions. Around them bloom pansies, pink and purple faces bobbing in the gentle breeze, a break from the pervasive white and yellow. Where's the car? After 3 weeks, I barely even remember the parking lot. I dig out the keys and press the lock button. A bright chirp leads me to the left. Even the sun-warmed asphalt smells wonderful. Coming close, I switch to the lock button and hear the driver's door unlock. Quietly, I open the door, toss my small bag across, and slide onto the seat. The car's interior is hot from the sun. The heat, too, is a wonderful feeling. Under its locked cover, the thermostat in my compartment said the temperature was always between 23 and 25 Celsius. Too cool to sleep in with just a sheet, too warm to sleep under a blanket. Even the water was regulated. The sink and claustrophobic shower both had temperature-limiting nozzles. If I turned on too much hot water, the flow choked off. The cold water was no lower than the room temperature. They never served me iced drinks or hot coffee. Everything was barely warm or just cool. This time, I let the tears flow for a while, leaning back on the hot leather, breathing in its rich scent. I can understand why I've been quarantined. They had to know if I might be deadly to others. But why had they made my environment so cheerless, so bleak? I lost my temper with Dr. Arnold this morning when he brought me the final test results to announce my days here were at last over. Why hadn't they let me have heat or cold or color? He'd had no answer beyond, this is how it's done. I wipe my nose with my finger, sniffing hard and blinking. The quarantine is finally done. That's all that's important now. Soon, I'll be home with Nita. I search for the car key. No, this is a push-button start. Fancy. Thumbing the button, I listen to the engine rumble and purr. My thumb leaves behind a faint smear. I lean back again. It's time for me to go, but I'm still lethargic from weeks of inactivity. After Dr. Arnold told me I was leaving, he had to urge me, Nag me, really, to get off the bed and pack my few personal effects. I guess my lassitude was why Dr. Arnold came alone this morning. He mistook it for apathy. After he told me I was fatally infected, was dangerously contagious, was being transferred to an even more secure facility, after he told me they'd be bringing Nita into quarantine, after sluggishly packing my bag, after he'd unlocked my compartment, his bunny suit sealed tight, he expected me to walk out with him. So now I have his car, and the gun from the front security desk, and the gun from the guy in the biohazard transport van as well. Once I get home, I'll give one to Nita. Nobody is taking us out of the sunshine again. Not when the dogwoods are ready to bloom.